Hi everyone, and welcome to the Mental Skills Recap. Obviously, with the current circumstance, we're not able to do this in the classroom environment, but we thought it would be good to catch up on the last 15 weeks of mental skills and go over some of the things that have been important in the course. So what we'll do is we're going to break it into 3 parts. Today we'll talk about weeks 1 through 5. And then in the coming weeks, the rest of the information will be sent out to you guys as well. So we started off the course talking about, why mental skills was important. We work on the physical aspect of tennis, the technique, the tactical, but how often do we really spend the time working on the mental side of the game, which if you hear any of the pros talk, it's a very, very important part of their game. So really the first thing we talked about was goal setting. Something that, to be honest with you, could be a great opportunity for a lot of you players right now to review your goals, have a think about what it is once you return to the court, what it is you want to be doing, where you see yourself in the short term, medium term, and long term. But within the class, obviously, we talked about why setting goals is important. It helps you keep track of what you want to achieve, especially with regards to your tennis. And as we mentioned, there's different types of goals. There's the short-term goals, which generally less than 6 months' time. Medium-term goals, which can be anywhere from 6 months to 2 years. And then for some of us, we've got longer-term goals. Do we want to play high school tennis, maybe college tennis? And beyond that, we've got professional tennis. It's also important to note that, a lot of goals that we set are outcome-based goals. I would like to win a tournament by a certain date, or I want to reach a certain ranking by a certain time. But it's also very important to acknowledge that there are process-based goals. They're the ones that you're able to compete really only with yourself. You're looking to improve areas of your game, hitting more topspin on your forehand, or hitting a faster first serve, perhaps. It doesn't really matter what type of goal you're looking to set. What is important is that you write these goals out, display them somewhere, share them with your parents, your friends, your coaches. It's really one of the ways that's important that helps you remain accountable for your goals. If you write down some goals, or you have goals and you put them away and no one ever sees them, or you don't talk about them, it's very easy not to work towards them. It's also important to note, though, that setting goals is a very individual process. It's up to you what you want to try and achieve. Don't let your friends, don't let your parents or your coaches say, well, this is what you need to do. Use them for help, especially your coaches. Help, understand where you want to go, what you'd like to do. But it's very much up to you what you want to get out of your tennis. And then when setting the goals, how do we set effective goals? Well, something that, we discussed in the class, something that is used, through not just tennis, but other sports, academics, even in the work world, using the SMART goal principle, making sure that your goals are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. So keeping your goals specific really relates to they should be as detailed as possible. Don't put a very general goal out there, otherwise it's hard to see what you're looking to achieve. They should be measurable. How are you going to quantify those goals? If it's reach a certain ranking, that's pretty straightforward. I'd like to reach a ranking of 100 in the Eastern region. Well, that's measurable by your ranking. Is it achievable? Can we achieve the goals that we're setting? Is it even possible? Realistic, not only can we achieve them, but based upon where we're at right now and the time frame we've given ourselves, are those goals realistic to us as individuals? And obviously time-bound, making sure that there's a time limit, because if you say you just want to get better as a player or you want to win a tournament, that's not really giving you any time frame in order to which to do it. So be sure and give yourself, if you're new to tournaments, maybe you want to win a tournament within the next 12 months. And of course, it's important to note that goals sometimes need to be flexible and adjusted. things happen. Sometimes you meet your goals early, and sometimes, as with recent events, we have a situation where not many of us are playing tennis right now. So whether that lasts for 2 weeks or 2 months, that's potentially going to change, when we set our goals and how we go about them. There are some potential issues with goals. Obviously, it's primarily a good thing, but we want to make sure we don't set ourselves too many goals. If we've got too much to focus on, it makes it difficult to be able to really focus in on the things that are important to us. We obviously want to make sure that we're not just setting outcome goals, saying that you want to win matches, you want to earn ranking points, you want to do this, It's important to also work on the process things, making sure that you're getting better with the things that you're doing day in, day out, and not just letting results occupy your thoughts. Some of those things are out of our control. If you base it just upon results, sometimes we can't control who plays in the tournaments. If you say, I want to win a tournament by this date, and you get injured and you don't play many tournaments, or the tournaments you do play, there's some great players in there. You may be playing great tennis, but you may not be able to achieve those goals. And obviously on the flip side of that, you need to make sure that your goals are challenging enough. If you're reaching your goals very easily and very quickly, you need to obviously make them more challenging for yourself. So to finish up with goals, again, this is a great time for some of you to be setting new goals or adjusting your existing goals for tennis. Feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to see some of you set some goals, and if you want to run them by me and see, quite frankly, if there's something that's realistic and something that you want to be looking towards, then I'm very happy to go over those goals with you as well. So after goal setting, we talked about pressure and expectations. And we obviously link this to why tennis players, or athletes for that matter, why they tend to act out and freak out during competition, why you see some of those players, screaming or shouting, why you see them breaking their rackets, and makes for some entertaining videos, but we have to understand why the players are getting frustrated. Some other examples of this frustration or anger, you might see the players screaming. You might see some of the juniors within tennis crying if results are not going their way. Other things you might see is players not trying, giving up, throwing away the tennis match, acting like they don't care. And generally, if they're not happy on the court, they never seem to be enjoying it. That can be another sign of this frustration and anger. This anger and frustration, a lot of it is caused by nerves. And nerves come from those pressures and expectations to do well. Most athletes, and certainly most tennis players, put a lot of pressure on themselves, to do very well. They want to win. They expect to play well. They expect to make certain shots, especially if it's something that normally works for them. But to be honest with you, the problem with expectations are we rarely meet them. Normally, expectations are very high. They're very unrealistic, and so therefore this often leads to disappointment. And quite frankly, if we do meet our expectations, there's no sense of achievement. It's what we expected to do, therefore I should have done it all along. So it doesn't match up, it doesn't add up. Either we're overly frustrated because we didn't meet our expectations, or we're not overly happy because we did. We just expected to do certain things. I think it's important to note, what causes these expectations. A lot of it is tied to winning. We're in a society where winning is very, very important, and a lot of value is placed on winning tennis matches, on getting the highest grades in school. And sometimes winning really is tied to how we feel about ourselves. A lot of people look at, I lost, therefore it's a failure. And what we're trying to do is to get players to understand and get you to understand that, not every loss is a failure, especially if you're working on things. We've got to, some of the best players in the world lose matches, and they lose matches they're expected to win. So what we have to do is we have to manage these expectations, and we have to look at them and maybe turn it around a little differently. Where did these expectations come from? I mean, honestly, the biggest one is coming from ourselves. I feel like all the tennis players I know, myself included, we're our biggest critic. We're the ones that put so much pressure on ourselves. But it can potentially come from your friends, your fellow tennis players, parents, coaches. But again, I think if you're working with the right people, you'll understand that a lot of these expectations, certainly the unrealistic expectations, come from yourself. If we think about, again, these expectations and why they're there and why we put these expectations on ourselves, is because there's a real fear of the consequences. There's a fear of losing. What could be the worst case scenario? You might lose against someone you're not supposed to, and then your results look terrible and your rankings are going to suffer. But if we can just be realistic and understand that nothing bad happens when you lose. We all like to win. Nobody likes to lose, as far as I'm aware. But really, nothing terrible happens. Your ranking might dip a little bit, or it might not change at all. But very often what we think and what we fear is going to happen is so much worse than what does actually happen. If you lose a match, you're going to learn from it. You've got to take the time to understand what you can do better, and the next time you step out there, how those things are going to change. Just remember, too much pressure and too high of expectations lead to a lot of players burning out and stopping playing the game of tennis. So having said all of that, what are some of the things that we can do to reduce or even get rid of these expectations and just take some of the pressure away? Well, first thing I would suggest is be realistic. You're not going to go out there and win every match. Very rarely are you going to play your best tennis. Most of us have some great days and some very poor days, and most of us play the majority of our tennis in the very average range for us. That doesn't mean average is bad. It just means what our level is on a day-to-day basis. Stay in a positive environment. Make sure, when you speak to the coaches, you understand that they're looking out for your best interest. They want you to succeed. They're there to help you. The friends that you have, make sure they're always encouraging you too. It's healthy to have some competition, but you don't want to be working with players that are always putting you down. Focus on goals. We just talked about goal setting, how important that was. Goals are very different to expectations. Goals are things that you're working towards. Expectations are things that if you don't hit them, you're disappointed. Goals, they're always changing. They're realistic. They're giving you some challenges, but they're also there to help you. And I think probably one of the most important things that sometimes is lacking is have fun. Work hard. Yes, winning is important to a lot of people, but not at the cost of not having fun. If you're not enjoying it, then you're forgetting why you started playing in the first place. All right, and obviously some of the tools that we'll talk about in the coming sections, things like focusing on ourselves, not other people. Concentrating on what we can do, controlling the things that are in our control, and then having good positive self-talk. Not beating yourself up every single time you make a mistake or things don't go our way. So there are tools out there to help us. And obviously we want to try and reduce that pressure and those expectations in order to get the very, very best out of our tennis. So in week 4, we talked about motivation. And we talked about the different types of motivation and how that's very, very important to, athletes in general, but certainly tennis players, given the fact it's an individual sport and it's, sometimes it's tough to maintain high motivation at all times. Why is motivation important? Well, it allows us, or it increases the desire to learn and to perform and to get out there every single day and work hard. Obviously, if you look at the professionals, there's some great examples of highly motivated players like Nadal, Serena Williams, even those that perhaps are not as vocal. Someone like Roger Federer, who's still playing as he heads closer and closer to the age of 40. It takes an incredible amount of motivation to be doing the same thing day in, day out. There's 2 major types of motivation: intrinsic, which is another way of saying internal, and extrinsic, which obviously is another way of saying external. The intrinsic motivation, it's why we start playing sports. It's just a love for the game. It's wanting to get out there to play and improve, not really thinking about results, but wanting just to get out there and compete. This type of motivation is absolutely necessary to make sure we can grow as a tennis player in the long term. Extrinsic motivation, it's more based upon a reward system. Winning a tournament, getting a trophy, getting ranking points. For the professionals, maybe it's a motivation of money, prize money, fame. It can be, however, viewed as a short-term fix. It's definitely necessary. It'll help you with some of the short and medium-term goals that you're setting for yourself, but it shouldn't be the only type of motivation. Let's put it this way: if you're only using external motivation, the extrinsic motivation, it's just, you're going to get bored. It's not something that can continue to motivate you to play. Having that internal desire, just to get out there and practice when you're not feeling great or when you're tired. Unfortunately, if you don't have that internal motivation, very often it leads to players ending up quitting the game of tennis. So whose responsibility is motivation? Obviously, parents can help. Coaches can be there to motivate players when perhaps they're not feeling great out there. But ultimately, it's the player's responsibility. If you're not going to be the one to get out there and want to do it, then it's not going to last, and you're certainly not going to be able to play tennis for the long term. So, many of you are highly motivated. Even when you've had a bad loss or you've had a bad practice, I see you out there, getting back out there, working hard. So really, it has to come from within. It has to come from you guys. Some of the things that can maybe help you stay motivated, or certainly help you keep working on that motivation, especially in the long term. We've talked about it, and you'll hear me talk about it a lot, but setting goals is very, very important. It's a chance for you to go back and review things and see how close you are, or if you're just a little further away, maybe it gives you the extra motivation to get out there and hit more serves, or do some fitness on your own, do some things, some extra things that are going to get you to where you need to be. Find things that motivate you internally, on the inside, whether you look at videos or highlight reels for inspiration. Just find things that give you that little bit of motivation that perhaps give you the edge over other players out there. Find a role model, whether that's a player who's maybe a little bit older, a little bit more experienced, or whether it is a professional that you can see what they did with their career. Ask yourself the question, am I working as hard as this player? And if it's a professional, ask, am I working as hard as they did as a kid? Find good examples and good positive role models of people that you would like to be like. Don't forget to give yourself credit for achievements, in practice and in matches. A lot of players will say, wow, I lost in the final, I played my worst match, it was terrible. But you don't think about the 4 previous matches that you won, how you won them, and what a great job you did in them, right? So there's always things you can take from your tournament matches or your tournament runs where maybe you didn't win in the end, but you still got 4 good wins under your belt. And probably the most important thing is continue to work with motivated people. We all know who are the players who want to be out there, who want to work hard. Well, get out there and work with those players. Ultimately, it comes down to you. But if you surround yourself with the best players and the most motivated players out there, it's only going to help your tennis. In week 5, we talked a little bit about stress management and really defined what stress is when it comes to tennis. What does stress look like when it, on the tennis court? It leads to players being tight, pushing the ball, not playing well, maybe being inconsistent with the shots that they can hit, certainly not playing as well as they know that they can, And again, as we've talked about, that can lead to its own frustrations and being upset and being angry and maybe, bouncing the racket or hitting a ball in anger. It's important that we try and manage that stress the best we can. Stress isn't always bad, and we've got to frame it, and we've got to talk about it slightly differently. But another way you could look at stress is if you're nervous. A lot of people will say that if you're not nervous, you're not ready. If you go into a match and you're feeling kind of flat and you're not nervous, then it's difficult to get up for it and prepare yourself for battle. So a little bit of nerves, those butterflies in your tummy, they help you get ready to go out and play. Obviously, you don't want to feel so nervous that you can't play and you can't hit the ball the way you want. But it is important to be ready to go out and compete whenever you play. I think it's also important to realize, figure out what makes us nervous, what stresses us out, and not necessarily talking about just tennis now. But when we talked about it in class, everyone was talking about how nervous they get for exams at school, or at the time, I think there was a musical performance going on for some of the students. Public speaking, that's one that stresses a lot of people out, all the way through, to adulthood. A lot of adults I know get very, very nervous about speaking in public. And that's before you even start thinking about competing, in athletics or sports in general, let alone perhaps if you're competing and there are people watching and you're trying to perform in front of a number of others. What's important to note, again, stress is the way we react to a situation. It's not the fact that we're out there competing. It's not the fact that we're out there speaking in public. Stress is the way we are reacting to that situation. So to a certain degree, we are in control of how we react. Now, again, if you speak to someone that gets very stressed out and feels very nervous in these situations, it's not something they can switch on and off. But if we acknowledge that it's our reaction, then there are things that we can do to work on that. So where does this stress come from? Well, obviously, externally, not talking about ourselves, it can come from perhaps our parents, when we want to perform well, or when we know how much time and effort they put into our tennis and we want to do well for them. Again, our friends, maybe it's things when you're outside playing tennis, maybe it's the weather, maybe it's your opponents, bad line calls, bad bounces. Again, things that aren't necessarily in our control, but nonetheless, they can definitely stress us out. And obviously, perhaps most importantly, the internal stress, things that we say to ourselves, the negative thinking. I can't believe I've missed 3 forehands in a row. It's the worst tennis of my life. You're never going to win this match if you keep playing that way. And again, we'll talk more about self-talk a little bit in future sections, but just having these dialogues with ourselves, putting even more stress on us in a situation where things may not be going well. So how are we going to manage that stress? I think this is the most important thing. Physically, we can always work on some relaxation techniques. You'll hear me talk about visualization and how important that is. Seeing things ahead of time, understanding the situations that can arise. Maybe breathing, recognizing when we do feel the nerves and we do feel stressed. Taking some nice deep breaths, thinking about, how we're going to handle the situation. And maybe distracting ourselves a little bit too. Listening to music, watching your favorite TV show, the night before a tournament so you don't get too stressed out about it. There's always things we can do. And again, because it's so individual, you have to find what works, for you. Mentally, again, this positive self-talk, making sure that you're giving yourself good messages. You're not beating yourself up. You're thinking about the positives that could come out of a situation. If you find talking to family is stressful, then don't do it. But if you speaking to your parents before matches helps you, then talk to them. Talk to coaches that you trust, people out there that are going to help you talk through certain situations just to help you handle those stressful situations. Just be mindful again. Try and stay positive. Don't think about those negative thoughts. And something, again, that's very, very important, you'll hear a lot of people talk about, stay in the present moment and focus on the playing. Don't focus on outcomes. Don't focus on what's already happened. Don't focus on things you can't control. Just focus on the tennis itself and what you can do to move forwards. So on that note, everyone, I want to say thank you very much for listening. That's the first section of our recap. Stay tuned. Next week, I'll be sending out another recap for weeks 6 through 10. And then obviously, again, if you have any questions in the meantime, please feel free to email me. A lot of us have extra time on our hands right now. I'd be happy to get back to you, especially if it comes to reviewing some of those goals that maybe you're setting again with regards to your tennis. Thanks again, guys. Talk to you soon.